What is up, everybody? My name is Robert Donaldson, and today I'm joined by a social media friend, actually, who I am just now seeing first time face to face, and we literally just met. I'm not joking, about 1 minute ago, but he has such a great follow on Twitter. I only knew him as CBB Nick on Twitter before now, but hey, give him a follow over on social media. Really great guy to interact with, especially if you are in that sports betting world and like to be ingrained in it. Um, man, Nick, tell me, man, how you been feeling about this college basketball season? I know it's a little bit bittersweet that's kind of winding down, but this is kind of what everything culminates to, and while we watch all these games all season long.
Yeah, definitely. It's been fun. It's been a good year to see, some teams that I didn't expect to emerge as contenders, maybe make it to the second weekend in March. It's been depressing. Some teams, we're watching the ACC in a down year, and that's my home conference. So it's a bit sad to watch them, but it's always fun. I no matter what happens, no matter what teams are good, what teams are bad, I'm going to watch and I'm going to dive into it.
That's so. Actually, I don't know this. Who is your hometown team, or who is your team that you pull for?
So growing up, I remember my dad always rooting for Duke. So I didn't go to Duke. We're not from Carolina, anything like that. But I just remember like being a little kid and watching Coach K and my dad rooting for Duke. So that's what I grew up with. So that's who I root for. I know it's a bandwagon type of school, and everyone makes fun of Duke fans and stuff like that. But that's just who I grew up with in my house. And my dad rooting for. So I just adopted him, and that's been my team ever since.
Hey, sometimes the sports teams pick us, right? And if you are a fan and you like watching them, like who's to say, like, yeah, you can't enjoy watching a certain team play. I was growing up in Iowa, so no professional sports teams out here. Obviously, they got the Hawkeyes that everybody loves, but then for football, I gravitated towards the Steelers, kind of similarly to you. Uh, First, when I was really young, watched Ben Roethlisberger's rookie year and got hooked on those Super Bowl runs. That's kind of what
Yeah.
happens sometimes when you don't have a direct link to a team.
Yeah,
Um,
for sure.
but yeah, to kind of give people an idea of what we're going to be doing today, just kind of like a hangout, talking about college basketball. It's such a fun sport to talk about, especially now that we're winding down towards these conference tournaments and the NCAA tournament, and even the NIT, which I think is going to have fun teams that we've been pulling for as far as the mid majors are concerned all season long. Um, that said, we are definitely going to put a little bit of a premium on the bigger conferences, like the higher majors for sure, just because those teams or those conferences are going to get the bulk of the teams into the field. And the biggest one that I think we have to lead off with, that if we're going to talk about, you know, making up the field, is the Big 12. The seedings just got released for the first time this week as kind of the precursor to Selection Sunday, and 5 teams in the top 12 from the Big 12. I mean, this conference is loaded. I don't think there's really a lot we can add as far as what other people in the national media haven't already said about these teams. But I
Right.
think maybe we have some different angles or different takes on how we kind of perceive this shakeup. So, obviously in the top 5, you have the Kansas Jayhawks. As far as the Big 12 top 5 is concerned, that is, you have the Kansas Jayhawks, Longhorns, Baylor, Kansas State, Iowa State, and then TCU is right on the cusp of that as well. Out of those 6 teams, I guess, give me kind of just a brief ranking system, or maybe even a tier of kind of how you see those teams shaking up there.
Yeah, the Big 12 is always a competitive conference. It's sad to see Texas Tech not up in those numbers, and West Virginia too, but it's how it is. This conference, like I said, always competitive, always fun to watch. I think it's kind of like inevitable that Kansas probably wins this conference. I think they have the easier schedule going forward. I looked at it a couple weeks ago, and I think they have their tough matchups minus tonight at TCU. I think they have a lot of the home games. The last game this season is at their on their home court versus Texas, I believe. So I think that's kind of going to be the decider. So I think they'll probably come out on top, but it's not like, other conferences where there's one or two teams up in that like S tier, and then the fall off in that A tier is big. Like I think you could make an argument for any of those top 5 teams, to be in that S tier echelon of teams. Like Kansas State is what, fifth, fourth in the conference. Like Kansas State could make a run in March. Like that team is scary. And TCU, if Lampkin and Miles stay healthy and stay on the court, like that is a scary team that you definitely don't want to face.
Yeah, especially when they have Emmanuel Miller playing well in those absences as well. I feel like those sorts of things build confidence when a guy like Mike Miles comes back and a guy like Eddie Lampkin can sort of get his feet under him battling that ankle injury. And even what's insane too is 2 years ago, Iowa State was looking like one of the worst teams in the entire country. and
Yep.
now and now in the toughest league in the entire college basketball landscape, they are suddenly, a budding 4 or 5 seed, a team that's going to be really thick in the mix for probably a lot of people's brackets moving to the second weekend. And man, that just kind of speaks volumes to what Otzelberger has done over at Iowa State. And what I love about this league, just kind of watching it, play out and unfold, is you don't have one style that dominates all. I think over the years you'll look at the Big Ten and people will point to slower, methodical, physical paces, and maybe that doesn't translate the best over into March. Maybe you'll have some teams making runs there that have those balanced offenses in the mix with good defense. But in the Big 12, man, you just have some complete teams where they're not just good on offense or not just great at one area. They are balanced all the way around. And then you'll have a team kind of like an Iowa State or a TCU that, maybe they don't have the most high powered, offense as far as jump shots go and scoring runs go. But they are going to be like those Virginias in the tournaments, or who are going to really punch you in the mouth, and they're going to give teams, trouble if they can make it to that second weekend. So let me ask you this: as far as the first three go, Kansas, Texas, Baylor, that's kind of how the conference is shaking out right now based on conference standings. Would you put anybody above, change that order up at all? Would you put maybe a Baylor ahead of Texas, or how do you think as far as just their capability in March and the tournament actually goes? Like, who is the most dangerous out of those three, and how would you rank those three?
That's tough. I think I would leave Kansas at the top. I think they probably are the better of those three teams. But again, like I said, it's so close that like the margin isn't like a definite, like if Texas made it farther than Kansas, I'm not going to be like at all surprised, or vice versa. I think maybe I would switch just Baylor and Texas. I think I'd maybe put Baylor second. That collapse the other day, after that huge lead they had on Kansas, I don't know if it's telling of anything more than maybe just an off second half. But if they can manage to get that type of lead in the first half and keep it, I mean, they're obviously a dangerous team, right? Like LJ Cryer, that whole roster is just scary good. But yeah, I think maybe I would just swap Texas and Baylor.
Yeah, I think I would do the same. And going into that game on Saturday and at the Fog with Baylor and Kansas, I thought that was going to be a very telling game. For a little bit there, I'm like, man, this Baylor team, it should be the odds-on favorite if they can, pull this off. But the Fog, that kind of speaks to the volume, or like the home court advantages that go on in this conference. And a lot of these high majors have the same thing going on, but the Big 12 especially, you step into Hilton, you're thinking, okay, well, Iowa State's going to win. You go to the Fog, you're expecting Kansas to do what they did, go on that insane scoring run. And then
Right.
obviously the Octagon of Doom, all these kind of cool ass venues. And tonight, even in Fort Worth, now that TCU's kind of a budding program on the rise again, they've got Kansas. We're recording this on a Monday, right before the tip of the Kansas a TCU game, so this should be an interesting one to kind of watch in retrospect. But man, as far as that Big 12 goes, after you have those, first six, you have teams like Oklahoma State. I think it's a pretty good team. You have Texas Tech, who is now looking pretty darn decent. I mean, they had a
Yeah.
massive comeback against Iowa State. They beat Kansas State. They beat Texas. I mean, there's no off nights. And even Oklahoma, tomorrow, we're looking ahead to Tuesday, but they have a matchup with who do they play tomorrow? Texas Tech, and
Mhm.
they're the favorites, despite Texas Tech, looking so damn good the past 3 or 4 games. Um, as far as those bottom four, how many of those teams do you think potentially could sneak into the tournament field, or are going to be right there on the bubble? And do you think that they get any more in other than those first six?
Um, I don't, I guess the obvious one would be Oklahoma State because they have that 7-7 conference record and they have some good wins. I don't know if any of the bottom three in West Virginia, Tech, and Oklahoma will get it in. I think in a hypothetical world, if we elongated the season, that Tech would make a run maybe because they've found their stride. But I don't see the bottom three getting in. But maybe West Virginia. But yeah, Tech and Oklahoma, no, I don't think there's a chance they get in.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting because West Virginia, I feel like their strategy before they lost that game against Tech last time out on Saturday was just win your home games, you're in. But now it kind of almost looks like, well, maybe if Texas Tech can beat TCU at home, beat Oklahoma tomorrow, and then beat Oklahoma State at home, even if they lose to Kansas, and maybe sneak in one or two wins in the Big 12 tournament, which I don't think is too egregious. It's hard to keep a team like that out when you're playing that well as of late. I think, we've
Yeah,
seen.
that's fair.
Yeah, we saw. I mean, we've seen it over years with like Trey Young's Oklahoma, where they had those 13 or 14 losses or whatever it was, and they still snuck in the field despite what everybody else was kind of pointing at there. But yeah, Big 12's loaded. It's going to be a fun way to see, a way to kind of think that shakes out, especially with how those teams perform come tournament time. Um, let's go down to the Big East though. Let's kind of go in order of the B's, the three B's here in the high major competition. So for the Big East, it looks like there's kind of like that group of five that everybody kind of looks at. You have Marquette, Xavier, Providence, Creighton, UConn. What's interesting is, a month and a half ago or 2 months ago, you would probably rearrange that from where the 5-4-3s are at and just kind of go in order of having, UConn probably spearheading it after how they performed in their non-con schedule. Then maybe Creighton because Brian Kalkbrenner hadn't missed those games yet. And then Providence, you would expect to just kind of handle business at home all season long and still be in the mix firmly in the tournament. And now all of a sudden, we're sitting here on February 20th and Marquette spearheading the top. Then you have Xavier coming in second, then Providence third, Creighton fourth, and UConn fifth. This has just been an interesting thing to watch play out because how do you gauge something when that kind of happens where you have these teams in non-con play just showing out, and then once it comes to like the conference play time, you see him almost hit like kind of a lull. Like, do you think that's an issue of peaking too early? How do you kind of view something like that?
Yeah, I'm not sure actually. It's a good question. I think when they have those big non-con games and they win, it's still telling of how good that team is. They might go into conference play and it might just be like that typical, that division rivalry type of thing where these teams just know each other so well that yeah, UConn might go on the road and get a big win against a team that doesn't know them that well, but then when they go to like Providence and play in the AMP, it's like Providence knows how you play and they know what you're going to do. And it's just that, that in division, in conference, head to head. But yeah, I mean, this is a conference that gambling wise, like I can never read. I'm always on the wrong side of everything. Finally, like I was just like, you know what? Whenever Providence is playing at home, I'm just gonna take the ML and I'm just gonna just watch them win. Like no matter the spread, like we just had them play, this past weekend. I think it was like they were -4 versus Nova or something, and I was like, I'm just gonna take the money line. Like I know that's gonna cash. Like I just need to see a win Providence at home. But besides that, like I'm terrible at reading this conference. I don't know about you, but I just can't get a read on them.
This is just one of those conferences where you almost gotta trust Vegas blindly. I mean, if you see, I think the weirdest line recently was St. John's only laying like 3.5 points or 2.5 points against Butler, and I was just like, well, somehow Butler's gonna pull this out, and of course they hit a buzzer beater. Then you have, the Xavier Butler upset as well. There,
Yep.
Xavier's only laying 5.5. I feel like you just gotta almost fade your what your brain tells you in this conference because nothing really makes sense, and
Nope.
and especially like early on too when Connecticut was catching all those double digit favorite lines because of how they performed in non-con play. It's just one of those things where how long can they really just trounce teams the entire year? Are they really built like that? Obviously, kind of showed up that they're not that good. They're still, I think, loaded with talent, but
Mhm.
it's definitely like you said. Once you get into conference play, these teams are familiar with each other, and although I don't think home court matters as much in the Big East, it definitely still is a prevalent thing, and these teams are still loaded with talent. So my question to you, other than those top five, do you think any of those other teams have any kind of stake as far as potential tournament lives are concerned or postseason concerned?
Um, Maybe Seton Hall. I think it depends on how Villanova probably closes out because they'll probably get that preferential treatment that we're seeing like teams like UNC get, where they might not have the best season. And if they weren't named UNC or Villanova, that they'd probably be out.
Hmm.
But because they have those names, everyone wants to see them in. So it depends on how Nova finishes out the season. I could see Seton Hall definitely getting a seed and maybe making. I don't think they'll make it to second weekend. Actually, they might make it to the round of 32. But yeah, besides those top five, I would probably just bank on Seton Hall and the rest are out.
Yeah, and so I'll ask you this as kind of a follow up. A lot of people when they look at the Big East this year, at least what I hear on social media or on maybe just national television coverage, they'll say, this is a very top heavy conference, and I, yeah, there are some really good top teams. Like I think Marquette could potentially make a Final Four, and I wouldn't blink. Same with Xavier, same with UConn, same with Creighton. I think I'd be a little bit surprised with Providence making a Final Four, but also I wouldn't be entirely shocked if they made, say, a Sweet 16. I think that would definitely be in the cards for them. So you're talking about teams that, when you're talking about Elite Eight and Final Four potential, those are talking about the 8 teams all encapsulated across the entire landscape of college basketball. And we're looking at maybe 2 or 3 from this conference that could pull it out. I mean, how do you evaluate that? Are we just maybe overrating this conference as far as the top teams are concerned because of picking on the bottom half? Or is this a conference that the top teams are just that good and they're just so far and away from the other teams who aren't maybe horrible, but just not on that tier?
Yeah, I think it definitely probably has to do with when we watch teams like Marquette play like a Georgetown or a DePaul, because they're gonna beat them up bad, and they're gonna look way good, like way better, and they're gonna inflate their stats and everything like that. But I think this year is a little different, where it's not very clear, like who the odds on, like favorite, like this team is for sure going to make the finals type of year. Like obviously, March is March and it's crazy, but like we usually know, like, okay, this team, like the deep, like they're going to make it to the Elite Eight at the worst, and we have those top echelon type of teams. But I mean, how many number one seeds have we seen drop games this year already? So I think this year specifically is going to be crazier than most, where I think there's potential upsets and maybe in every round. You know what I mean? Like these teams are capable of dropping games to teams that are in the lower tier. So I think maybe that has to do with it, where we just see the like Marquette and Xavier like pound their in conference teams, and then it's like, well, if they go up against a Purdue or maybe an Alabama at home, it's like they have the potential to knock these teams off. So I think that has to do with it.
Yeah, and I know it's kind of going, we're free flowing a little bit here, but you kind of brought it up as far as, there's not a clear number one team or like a number one seed. There's like that team just looks dominant. I mean, Alabama, who was sitting on the one overall seed line, got absolutely obliterated at Oklahoma this year, who we just talked about a team at the bottom of the Big 12. I mean,
Right.
and
Yeah.
like that game wasn't close. So it's super fun to kind of like March is just the best time of year. It's the best layout for a postseason in any professional or college athletic, and man, I really do love this time of year. It's bittersweet because all these teams we're losing half of or even more than half of all these teams that we've been watching all season long, but man, great time. It's going to be an exciting time. As far as let's move on to the Big Ten here and keep it kind of flowing here. This is a conference where I don't think anybody, as far as preseason projections, were in the ballpark. I think maybe everybody got Minnesota right, but
Mhm.
I don't think people expected Northwestern to have a shot at the very end to win this entire conference.
No.
And and then obviously Indiana, they at the midpoint, I think people were counting them out as not even making the field of play. That they had the Race Thompson injury, they had the Xavier Johnson injury, Trace Jackson Davis was dealing with injury, Jordan Geronimo was hurt, and they just kind of looked pedestrian at best. And maybe it was like another year where they play a Wyoming in the play-in type of game. But man, they have really elevated their play. They've picked up a lot of big wins. They've looked really dominant. Even on Saturday when they were down double digits to Illinois, they battle back, and it's just because they have a guy in Trace Jackson Davis who is a star. Now everybody's gonna criticize, I think, that those two teams as far as Purdue and Indiana in this conference because they do run through their bigs, and we've seen Oscar Shibwe fail, we've seen Zach Edey fail, Luke Garza fail, Obi Toppin. It's just, what do you think about the Big Ten and their viability in March? Because that's kind of the biggest knock on them. It seems like every year after a couple upsets get spotted.
Yeah, I mean, you said it. It's Big Ten, like Purdue, Northwestern. Like I see them getting to the Sweet 16, but do I see them getting past that? Just because of their historical, records? No. But like again, it's like, would I be surprised if Purdue gets to the Final Four? No, because they are a good team, but like you said, they're heavily relying on Zach Edey, obviously, and Indiana with Chase Jackson Davis. So it depends on how their guards play. I think if they have good games and they're able to, spread the floor and provide points from, the beyond the arc and just get some mid rangers and all that stuff going, then yeah, Purdue can definitely make a deep run. But again, I'm not going to bet on them because it's just year after year, it's the same thing. They get upset in the second weekend. And it's like, okay, well, there goes Purdue again.
Yeah, this might be the conference I have the strongest opinions about because I am an Iowa fan. I grew up watching these teams play, and I'm very ingrained in the Big Ten. And what I will say, my favorite team in this conference, period. And this isn't just from a value standpoint as far as betting on them to make a run. I think the best team in this conference come actual tournament play is Michigan State. You know, every single year there's a team where we look at them when they're in the Final Four or Elite Eight, and we're just like, how did we not know that the team with the athletic guards who can make jump shots, the high effort bigs, the depth, the great coaching, and just the name was going to make a run? It's every single year we're like, man, I should have known that. What am I thinking of? Michigan State is sitting at one. Let me count down here: 5, 6, 7, 8. They're ninth. They're sitting at number 9 in the Big Ten standings right now. You can throw that out. I mean, honestly, if they get in the field of play, even as an 11 seed in a play-in, you know how many 11 seeds we see every single year make those runs? I mean, when they lost their play-in game to UCLA made that run with a very similar mold. I mean, UCLA didn't have a dominant big; they had a high effort big and a guy who had to touch around the basket. Michigan State has that with Malik Hall, and Matty Sissoko, and Tyson Walker is just one of those guys that come March, I could totally see him at one point in the round hit, a 40-foot 3-pointer, just something ridiculous on a step back because he's so wiry and athletic. That's
Mm-hmm.
that's that's my favorite team in this conference. And what do you think there is potentially like a sleeper team in this conference? Maybe like a in Illinois if they sneak in the field, or Indiana, or Michigan, Iowa, anything that's kind of standing out there as far as the middle of the pack teams?
I actually, now that you said it, I like super agree with you. Michigan State is one of those teams that again, like no matter what their standings in the Big Ten, it like are like you don't want to play them in March. You don't want to play Izzo in any type of game, important game where it's an elimination. Like last year, to bring it back, like last year with Duke in the tournament, they played Michigan State in that second round, and that was the game that I was most nervous about on their run because it seems like they play each other all the time in the tournament, and I want no part of Michigan State in March. So yeah, I agree. I like Michigan State's team. I like Walker as well. I think he's an awesome player, and like you said, if he pops off and has like a Caleb Love type of March Madness game, like I'm not gonna be shocked if he's dropping 30 points and just ripping them from three, and they're all going in. Like I wouldn't be shocked at all.
Yeah, and I think North Carolina is another great example. Armando Bacot's a great post player, but it's not like he is the center point of that entire offense. He just
Right.
does his job, high effort. I think Michigan State has that mold to make that run, and that's why I've already placed several futures on them. So, knock on wood. But
There you go.
as far as, let's scroll down all the way down to the SEC. Now that we're kind of rounding out the high majors, we also have ACC and Pac-12 to talk about as well. But let's talk about the SEC here. It's a fun league. I think that the expectations were, I don't know if they were higher coming into the season than how it's shaken out. I think probably that'd be a fair assumption or a fair assessment, just given how a team like Florida fell flat, and how Arkansas, had those injuries and kind of came out flat, and then Auburn's not, having one of those dominant years. That said, they still have the consensus number one seed right now, at the top of the spearhead in the conference. And then Kentucky's probably going to make the field to play. Tennessee's probably going to make the field to play. A&M's right there. Other than that, it does kind of get interesting because Missouri's going to have some games where they're going to need to finish strong down the stretch here. Then you have Arkansas with definitely a chance to make the field, and then Auburn as well. What are your thoughts when you just look at this conference? What are your major takeaways from looking at the SEC?
Kind of surprised. I'm not a guy who pays attention a lot to like preseason rankings, or I'm really bad with like a bunch of roster moves and stuff like that. I usually kind of let the beginning play out, and then I'll learn everything from there. It might just be because I'm dumb. But Texas A&M surprises me that they're sitting second in the standings. Alabama doesn't shock me at all. I think I had this discussion with a couple other guys that Alabama, those couple years ago, I think 2018 maybe, where they were just shooting like 100 threes a game and were just beating teams up on offense. While this team is sort of the same, both of those defenses were so good. Like Alabama, I think is like top 5 or 10 in the country in defensive efficiency. Like they play both sides of the ball very well. So it doesn't surprise me that they're on top of the SEC and even the top of the top 25 rankings in the country. But yeah, this again, Tennessee too, another insanely good team. Definitely fun to play. I mean, we saw those two play each other, and that was an awesome game. But yeah, like you said, I think Auburn, not, I don't want to say disappointing, but last year, I think when they were like super dominant until like the couple weeks before the conference tournament, and then heading into March where they like fell off and then had a bad showing. It's not one of those years. I think again, like you said, Arkansas had those bad injuries and they're kind of in a disappointing year because you expect a lot from Arkansas. I love Musselman. I think he is like an awesome coach. He's fun to watch, and he seems like a player's coach. Like he's just in there, just having fun, and like he's with his team and they buy into him. And I think again, he's a great coach. Vandy's a bit of a surprise. I know that they've had some crazy games where they're winning at the buzzer, like they did me dirty with that Auburn game a couple days ago with that buzzer beater layup just to win the game. So maybe do you think Vandy has a shot at getting in and then maybe doing some damage, or how do you feel about Vandy?
I think they might have peaked a few games too late, because they had a stretch there where they had Kentucky, A&M, Alabama in a row, and,
Mm-hmm.
and they went 0-3. And
Right.
after that, they did go on the run. They beat Ole Miss, they beat Tennessee, beat Florida at Florida, South Carolina, and then beat Auburn. But man, the Auburn win doesn't look as promising anymore. That Florida win has been really downgraded. So you're really just clinging to that Tennessee win at the buzzer, and then an Arkansas win. That was an impressive win back in January, mid-January. But other than that, you have losses to Grambling. You know, you had losses to Southern Miss. It was a shaky start to the year. There was a lot of games where I thought they were in it and they could have snuck out a win, and it's obviously going to look better in resume. But now they're finishing out the year with LSU, Florida, Kentucky, Mississippi State. I mean, you can sweep that board and still not be looking that great as far as, your positioning to make a tourney run. I think
Mm-hmm.
they're going to be in the same position that A&M was last year, where they might finish ridiculously hot and have a record of, 21-12 or 21-13, and it's just not going to be enough because of the games that they dropped and the games that they could have won down the stretch. So I don't think they end up getting in. I think that's probably fair that they don't get in. And I think it
Yeah.
also kind of speaks to the SEC just kind of, having those top teams in the conference as far as, high seeds, but not much below that to kind of pick up wins on a nightly basis like you would in the Big Ten or the Big 12.
Yeah. That's a fair assessment.
All right. And so as we kind of move through these conferences here, let's take a look at the ACC next, because this is probably the most scrutinized conference in all of college basketball this season. And obviously, it speaks to your heart a little bit, knowing that you are, in fact, a Duke fan, and we're kind of ingrained in this conference growing up as well. Um, when you look at this conference, I think the biggest knock, obviously, is that you have Virginia, you have Miami, but then you have a whole bunch of garbage at the bottom, and then some middle pack teams that are have those split opinions. Let's just kind of say, because you have the Wake Forests of the world, you have the Dukes, North Carolina, Syracuse, Virginia Tech, NC State, Clemson, Pitt, and everybody seems to believe that they have a handle on, well, Pitt is the third best team or Clemson is the third best team, but they are just kind of middle of the pack, boring, or would be a 7, 8, 9, 10 kind of seed in most kind of years. How do you see it from your eyes? Obviously maybe you have a little slant, but we can definitely work through it. Like, how do you kind of see this conference shaking up, and how good do you actually think that it is?
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I think Virginia and Miami are definitely the best teams in this conference by far. I think this is one of those conferences where the fall off between the top two to the next, middle of the pack is large. Like I don't think that despite their records that Pitt, Clemson, NC State, and Duke are on the echelon of Miami and Virginia. Now, I don't think um Miami and Virginia will make a super deep run in March. I think Miami is probably the scariest. I think Miami's going to win the ACC tournament. I think Virginia probably wins the regular season. But I think once the tournament comes, we'll probably see them two face off against each other in the final, if I had to guess. And I'm going to take Miami. Miami's kind of just a wagon, and whenever I doubt them, they come back and they slap me in the face and they end up winning the game and making me look like a fool. I think they're just that team is built very well. I think they have very good guards in Isaiah Wong. I think Norchad Omier is really good down low. I think Norchad maybe just has to stay out of foul trouble. I think he's had a couple games where he's just gotten these early fouls and then just doesn't play in the first half at all. But luckily they are good enough to play without him. But yeah, like Nigel Pack, Isaiah Wong, like I love these guys. Isaiah Wong is probably my favorite college basketball player this year. And it's fun to watch them. So I'm high on Miami. But yeah, the middle of the pack is gross. Like I'm not gonna sit here and pretend like Duke and NC State, even Wake Forest, Syracuse, like these teams are bad. I think maybe we'll see them get a high seed and get into the tournament, but I would be shocked to see a lot of them get to the second weekend.
Yeah, and if you were to look at, say, let's just kind of go through the pick: Clemson, NC State, Duke, Wake Forest, Syracuse,
Mm-hmm.
UNC tier, who could potentially, make a run out of those teams if they get a good draw or get a good coin flip? Because man, I mean, just a season ago, we saw three teams from this conference in the Elite Eight. And North Carolina, their makeup really didn't change, but all of a sudden they're finding themselves at 16 and 11. They had to lose to some teams that could, beat that North Carolina team, even if they did maybe have like a mental fall off or something like that. you know, is there any team as far as, those that little clump right there that would be like, I could see them potentially sneaking their way and making a run if they get a good draw or something like that.
My My initial guess is maybe Wake Forest or NC State. My problem with Wake Forest is that their defense is bad. I think
Yes.
their offense is capable of beating teams and scoring in the 80s as we see them do, or high 70s. They're a very good three-point shooting team. Appleby is really fun to watch. He's very good. But they're, like I said, their defense is bad. So if you're one of those guys that says, defense wins championships, which obviously is true in some respect. They're 231st in the country in defense. So I'm not going to put a lot of eggs in their basket. NC State, again, good. Smith is an awesome guard to watch. Their big man is awesome to watch. He's also very good. He dominated Baycott yesterday when they played. But again, it would be one of those two. But yeah, once Wake Forest plays an offense that is on their level, they're gonna get run out of the gym.
I pretty much lean exactly where you're leaning. The one thing we haven't talked about yet that's obviously a prevalent thing in March is team steal bids. It's not just, who's projected to make the field, that's who makes the field. I guarantee you, out of these high majors that we've talked about, you know, two or three are going to have a bid stealer. And I think the ACC is the very likely candidate because you have a team like North Carolina that on any given day can beat a Virginia and Miami. and they might draw that team in the second round of the ACC tournament, and maybe they can steal the auto bid. I think if the field opens up like that and you get rid of one of those two top teams, it's really anybody's ball game. I think Virginia Tech is still the team that, on paper for me, they have a guy down low in Grant Basile who's very good, gets a lot of boards, can finish around the rim. Then you have just guys that are on the wing, ball handlers that are still crazy talented. And we've seen this team play up in spots. And even during their 0-8 stretch in the middle of the season where they were just struggling in deep water in conference play, you know, they were still potentially winning 4 or 5 of those games. And man, I mean, tomorrow they have Miami at home. I think that's a winnable game for them just based on the matchup and what that line is kind of telling us a little bit. I won't say, actually, I will say, spoiler alert, I do have a bet on Virginia Tech tomorrow. But I mean, that's the team again. That kind of speaks to how open this conference is. That the team that everybody thinks is just rolling at 22-5 in Miami, they're going on the road at Virginia Tech, and potentially they're the underdogs according to the betting
Yeah.
line. So I do think this is the bid steal conference, and I'm with you. I think Wake Forest doesn't have the defense to get there, or if they do end up getting in, I don't think they kind of have the ability to make a run. But North Carolina, Virginia Tech, and I want to believe in this Pitt team. I like how they just kind of they have some grit to them, little like some swagger. I think is the better term. They just have that thing that in March they're the team that makes the buzzer beater, in the second round, and all of a sudden they find themselves in the Elite Eight. I think that could definitely be a thing that could happen. But yeah, I'm it's kind of cool to get your take on it, just because I feel like the ACC is the most distant thing away from the Big Ten. There
Yeah.
at some points in our life, there was some, which conference is better, the Big Ten or ACC. But when there's really not that crossover of competitiveness for the best conference, it just kind of feels like they're in like their own little outer space land.
Yeah, fully agree. And to Pitt is like the darling that you want to bet on every game too. Like I think they have the best against the spread record this year of all teams. So like Pitt is a good team. I'm not saying they're bad or anything like that. Pitt is good. I'm just not going to put a lot of stock in them when it comes into March. I'm not going to put a lot of stock in anybody in this conference when it comes in there. It's just who are we going to see in the last week of March, you know what I mean? And it's like no one's going to be surprised if Virginia's there. I think maybe Miami would be a little bit of a surprise for like people that don't pay too much attention to that team. But Miami's awesome. I really hope they get deep. Because Duke is so bad, I'm gonna adopt Miami as my like stepchild from the ACC, and I'm gonna root for them. So I'm pulling for them.
Perfect. Yeah, and at least Duke is playing Louisville tonight and killing them. But hey, I just based on name brand, they were going to get into the field of play regardless, in my opinion. And they're still they still don't have a horrible record. They still have obviously a lot of talent. And like I said, the ACC is wide open. Like they could easily win that auto bid, and I wouldn't be surprised one bit. Let's head down to the final high major here that we have in the Pac-12. We don't have to spend too much time on the Pac-12 because this is, I think, the worst conference out of all of them.
I think so too.
Yeah,
I agree.
yeah, it's just like it's almost like UCLA and Arizona are the independents.
Yep.
Like, are they
Yep.
really even part of this conference? Like, there's no way.
Well, UCLA won't be soon. You're gonna have them with you, so
Yeah, we're gonna have two of the top three teams in the conference
yeah,
in the
literally.
Big Ten. So good luck, UCLA and Arizona State. And oh man, we're gonna be living in a world where Arizona State might have a chance to win this conference every other year just because of
That team is they're something. That team.
disgusting. I can't get behind them at all ever.
No,
But do you think out of any of this is another conference that potentially we could see a bid steal? We saw it in the past with Oregon State. We've seen Colorado make deep runs in this conference tournament. Washington. Is there a team, maybe like an Oregon or a Utah or a Wazoo, maybe that they catch the luck of the draw, they knock off somehow UCLA or Arizona, and all of a sudden they're looking pretty decent to steal a bid?
my initial guess was Wazoo. I don't think Colorado this year, or Washington is going to do it. So my initial bet would be Wazoo, but I don't think we're going to see a team like UCLA or Arizona get there, get the one seed stolen from them in the after the conference tournament. I think those two teams are just way better than the rest of them. But I could see Wazoo making a little bit of a run in their tournament.
Yeah, especially because, you look at Wazoo and they have that, I think, the weirdest win in this conference this year, where it was a dominating win over Arizona at Arizona.
Yep.
And, once that March happens, once that conference tournament hits and the other team starts making those shots, teams get nervous. But yeah, enough of
Yeah.
the Pac-12. That is what it is. And we've already. I knew this once we were talking on social media that we were just going to be blabbermouths, kind of going on and on about these teams, just because college basketball is so fun to talk about. We do
Mhm.
want to definitely talk a little bit about the high mid majors, or even just mid majors in general. You know, man, not to paint just a big blanket, because there are so many good majors this year, and this does feel like one of the years where we're going to see several runs from some of these teams that do end up sneaking out a bid. And man, you look at CUSA, the Sun Belt, the A10, Mountain West, MVC, Sun Belt, or I already said the Sun Belt, but with WCC and then the MAC, these conferences, I just listed off a ton, but they are so wide open. They have a lot of teams in there where if they get in, I could easily see a run from any of these teams. Give me three teams out of these mid majors, and we can kind of work through it together, that you say put that team in the field somehow. And I'm thinking maybe Sweet 16, Elite 8. I'm thinking, a run like a Middle Tennessee or a St. Peter's or a Loyola Chicago. Who are three teams that really just jump off the page?
And I want to take a team from the Mountain West. I think this conference is very good. I think it's like whoever plays at home wins. That's been like my pitch on this Mountain West conference is I think any of these teams can beat each other if they have the home court advantage. Like we watched Fresno play SCSU a week or two ago, and like everyone was all over Fresno, and I'm like, what are we talking about? Like FCSU is way better than Fresno, and I turned the game on and it's like 20 to 25, like 30 minutes into the game. And like, I'm like, what is happening? Like like SSU can't even score against Fresno. So this conference is really good. I don't know how many bids they're going to get. I imagine at least three,
Yeah.
which pushes out Utah State, which sucks because I really like Utah State.
Mm-hmm.
But to get to your question, I think if I had to pick one of these top three between SCSU, Boise State, and Nevada, oh, I'm gonna go with the Broncos, actually. I watched them play versus Colorado State. Um I think they're capable of getting it done. I really like this Broncos team. I love this conference. I wish we could get the top four in. I wish we could get the Aggies in because I can make a really good argument for the Aggies, but I just don't think they're gonna get in. So I'll go with the Broncos for one of mine.
Perfect. Yeah, I think that's a great pick right there, and they were definitely going to be one of my top three. I think their worst loss, came without Marcus Shaver in the lineup, and that's a ball dominant guard that's a really good scoring output guy, and
Mhm.
that's obviously going to be a big loss when you don't have him. I look at the A10 personally, just because when I kind of look at the sleeper teams, and when I'm picking my brackets and just picking my future bets, whatever, I look at the teams or the conferences that are the most battle tested. When you have 1 through 10 that are just trading shots every single night. And
Yep.
this is also a conference where I don't think home court advantage plays a big factor. You have Dayton, I think, which is great. You have Virginia, VCU, that has a great home court environment. But other than that, it's just kind of a mixed bag, as far as the home teams are concerned, and just the actual ruckus environments. And man, there's a team in the middle here, and they do play tomorrow, that I just think if they can potentially steal the bid, and that is St. Joe's. I thought
Wow, okay.
I thought they were going to be awful this year. I mean, we saw them in the past couple years just look completely dreadful in this league. But man, they have been stomping teams at home, on the road. They've been competing with really good teams. I think the line tomorrow against VCU, the spearheading team in this conference, is very telling, because it's sitting at 4.5, and it's only dropped since they opened. And I think we see a scenario tomorrow where St. Joe's pulls off a VCU upset, and all of a sudden a lot of their potential lust as a sleeper kind of goes away, especially because when you win a game in this conference, you're shooting up 4 or 5 spots in the standings. When you're one of these
Yeah.
teams, and all of a sudden you're not just, oh, you're at the bottom of the 13 teams, you're near the double digit seeding, you're sitting at the top 4 or 5. And I'm telling you, I think St. Joe's is the team that I would kind of take a look at, that if they can somehow sneak in the tournament, they're just one of those weird teams like St. Peter's last year where it just doesn't make sense for them to make a run, and all of a sudden they're in the dance somehow.
Yeah, I definitely didn't expect that pick, but I like them. They're a good team. And like you said, yeah, if you get a win, you're going from what, like seventh in the conference to like fourth. Like you're jumping high up
Yeah,
in the standings. Yeah, I like that pick.
perfect. Other than that, so let's kind of go on through the next two here. Who would be another team for you that you like out of these mid-major conferences?
So I'm kind of being chalky and picking teams atop their conference, but I'm going to stick with it. That's who I am. I used to call myself Mr. Chalk because I'm just real bad at finding these teams like that where they're, eighth in their conference, but if they steal the bid, they're going to make a run. So I'm going to be chalk. I'm gonna go to the Sun Belt, and I'm
Okay.
going to take the team up top, and I'm going to take Southern Miss. I think Southern Miss is a very good team. I think they are going to they're going to win their conference, and they're going to get that seeding into the tournament. But I love this team. I've been backing them game after game, just riding them, and they have yet to like have a really bad game where the question marks are there, minus that South Alabama game the other day where they got fucking torched. That we'll write that one off. Besides that one, but again, South Alabama is also a very good team. I think they played, was it Alabama last year or maybe 2 years ago or something? I'm pretty sure they were like toe to toe with Alabama the entire game.
Hmm.
So South Alabama is definitely not a team to sleep on. I think this conference is actually really good with JMU in there as well.
Yep.
But I like Southern Miss, so I don't know if I'm talking Elite Eight with this team, but potentially second weekend with Southern Miss if they get a good draw, and depending, obviously depending on what seeding they get. But I'll take Southern Miss.
Yeah, this is another conference. I think we're kind of thinking the exact same, where it's so competitive. And again, I look at the conferences where every single night, you're getting a test. I think teams like Georgia Southern at home, Texas State, regardless, are tough. You have teams like UL Monroe playing up in this conference. App State has pulled off some big wins this year. And then you mentioned it, and I'm actually going to go with another kind of sleeper pick. And I think it's because I've been buying into the fact that they started slow, but I've been expecting positive regression all year long with them. And that is the team you just mentioned, South Alabama. I think with this conference field being wide open, I look at the team that, is just trending so high up right now. I mean, they've won their last 4. They've been blowing out teams. They're athletic as hell. They have good guard play. They have a good big down low. This is definitely a team that if they can sneak in the dance, can pull off an upset. If they do get in the dance, I would definitely take their money line in the first round. I can just tell you that much right now. I would blindly take it. I wouldn't care, just because they're the team that can get out on front of you early, and all of a sudden you have the better team, the better team in quotations, playing catch up, and that's usually where we see those upsets kind of happen. So I would definitely go to the Sun Belt there for my second one, and then
Yeah, that's a
as
good
far
conference.
it's really fun, and I can't wait for these conference tournaments to tip off. It's gonna
Oh,
be a blast.
100%. I love conference tournament.
Oh, it definitely. I think it's my favorite. The first little wave of conference tournaments I actually enjoy maybe more on par with this opening round of the NCAA tournament. It's just
Yeah,
there's
yeah,
so
yeah.
much flying. But
Yeah, oh yeah.
let's pick a final team though here. What would be your last little kind of mid-major sleeper that you think could potentially sneak in the dance and make a run there?
Oh, it's tough. I'm gonna go to a conference that I think is also super fun to watch. I think it's pretty even, maybe minus the bottom teams, which are very bad, but the above, the minus the bottom two, it's pretty competitive. We're gonna go to the Horizon,
Okay.
and I want to say Youngstown again, just because that's my chalky pick. But this conference is just so good. I really wish Detroit would make a run because of Antoine Davis and just
Yeah.
how good offensively that team is. I just don't know if they can win it. So I'll stay chalky and I'll go Youngstown. I think that this team is also just super fun to watch. I think this is one of those conferences that people kind of maybe don't. If you're a casual fan, you have no idea who these teams are, and there's a reason for it. You know what I mean? There's not going to be like these big stars. I'm sure Antoine Davis isn't even like a household type of name because he plays for Detroit Mercy, but he's the leading scorer in the country. But anyway, yeah, Youngstown State, they are dropping like 90 points, 80 points nightly on these teams in this conference. I think their offense is electric. I think, yeah, again, if they step it up defensively and get a good draw against a team that's maybe going to sleep on them and not going to take them seriously, that they're going to show them, why they won the Horizon and that they're not a team to be, slept on. So we'll take Youngstown.
That was actually gonna be my pick number three. So you had me
Oh,
scrambling
wow.
through the
My
standing. Yeah,
bad.
hey, sometimes I like to go with a little bit of a sleeper pick with my mid-major favorites, and I think a lot of times I'm kind of biased because I like the idea of upsets in March, and I see them every single year happen, and then I kind of look for almost like I target the teams that are in the mid-major conferences that are the sleepers within the mid-majors, and
Right,
and I do
right.
like kind of going that route. So with that said, let me go to my what I think will be the tightest um, mid-major conference tournament, and I think it's going to be just an absolute madhouse. It's the Missouri Valley Conference
Yep.
because I'm you look at Drake, they could somehow lose in the second round of this conference tournament, and I wouldn't be shocked. I mean, when you have teams at the very bottom like Northern Iowa, Missouri State, Murray State, Illinois State, who's played teams tough this year,
Mhm.
upsets are going to be happening. I don't
100%.
know, which teams are going to happen, but I will say, so I saw this team live, Indiana State. Obviously, they have a history in the tournament of stealing some upsets that here and there, and this conference in general just has some great history of teams getting in the dance, pulling off a couple upsets, and then making a run potentially. But yeah, I'm gonna have to go with Indiana State, the Sycamores. I just think this team, when watched them play against Northern Iowa, they just had so much swagger. They had guys who could score, get buckets, play defense, force runouts. It just looked like they were the most dominant team, in college basketball at some points. And I think when you have teams that have the ability to peak like that, especially when they've won their last 7 games, this is a team that I wouldn't be on one of the 3 seeds or the 4 seeds or the 5 seeds ending up playing Indiana State in the first round, just because that would be, again, instant blind money line play, for whoever they're playing, regardless. And so that would be my final mid major as far as who I could think would be the biggest sleeper for me, or my 3 sleepers there.
Yeah,
Um,
this is a good pick. They're catching fire right now too. Why they've won 7 straight or so. Like if you take that momentum into the conference tournament, and then when you get matched up with your Drakes or your Bradleys, like they're gonna get stunned because they're all on the same page. They're firing on all cylinders and they're a wagon. So I like that pick. It's good.
Yeah, and I think was it last year in this conference tournament that was the Drake Missouri State game with Gage Prim that I think believe went overtime.
I
I
think
know
so, yeah.
I know Gage Prim was there forever, and there's the COVID years they got in there that messed up like everybody's mind, and there was like
Mhm.
a blackout phase of like, did that year even happen? I don't recall.
Right. Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned Missouri State too, because I preseason we did some bracketology stuff, and I actually had Missouri State winning this conference. I don't think they're going to anymore. But yeah, they were my sleeper at the beginning of the season. So that,
Yeah,
yeah, it's competitive too. Like these mid majors, this is why college basketball is awesome, right? And you said it in the beginning of the show is this postseason, every team gets a shot. If you've proven that you're the best in your conference and you get these bids, even if your conference is that good, like a Mountain West side where you're going to get 2 or 3 seeds, like you guys get the chance to beat up on these teams like Virginia and Villanova and all these guys. And it's like these teams, this is what they play for. You know what I mean? Like getting just a matchup against those guys, those blue bloods, and proving we belong here. That's what March is all about.
yeah, and this is also kind of why when you reached out to me about maybe let's do a collaboration, let's do a show together. I was so excited because what other platforms are out there other than just maybe your personal Twitter account where teams are talking about St. Joe's or the Missouri Valley Conference or the A10. It it's you'd have to dive deep, like
Yeah,
dive really really deep just to find good substance on that.
for
And
sure.
I think mid majors, when watching them throughout the year, especially in their conference tournament action and then in the tournament, that's half the fun of the college basketball season right there. It isn't just all about those high major those conferences, because you have teams every single year. I don't know why it's a surprise that when a 12 seed pulls an upset. I know national TV will be like, "Oh, this is the
Mhm.
craziest thing that's ever happened," although it happened 7 times last year and 7 times the year prior. And
Right,
it's my favorite. What's more, this is why, again, this is the best layout in all of college athletics, as far as a playoffs format or a postseason format, and then same with the professionals. You know, and college football needs to catch up and say, hey, we need to start embracing some of these mid majors. We need to see a Tulane play, you know, Georgia or a TCU or a Michigan, just to have a shot,
right,
and that's why this tournament definitely gets you in the fields when those teams do end to lose, and those Cinderellas, just because it's like, wow, they left it all out there.
right.
Um, but that said, other than that, I think we hit a pretty good stopping point for at least this first episode. Is there anything else you wanted to kind of get off your chest, or maybe put a bow on that we maybe slightly addressed, or just something you wanted to get out there?
No, I think we nailed everything. I think just building on top of what you just said, like I saw some journalist tweet the other day that like viewership is going to be down for March Madness if like UNC isn't in a tournament. And I quote tweeted and I was like, I don't care if it was only mid majors in March. Like people are gonna watch it. Like, yeah, you're not gonna get your casual like dad and sits on the couch and turns it on and watch it. Like all of the people like us are gonna watch it no matter who is playing. Like I don't care. Like if I have to, we'll kick Duke out. We'll kick all these big schools. Who cares? If it's good games and good competition, like it would be so awesome if the Final Four were like four mid-major teams and not one team that like my dad would know. Like that would be awesome. So yeah, I think and like you said, I think football. I don't think 68 teams it would be good for football, but if you give them eight, even 12 or something,
Mhm.
and give the first four a bye, like, and give Tulane a shot at, the best teams are going to win no matter what, right? Georgia's not going to drop a game if you
Mhm.
expand it, and they're not going to drop a game to Tulane if they're better than Tulane. They're going to beat the shit out of them. So yeah, I agree with everything you said, and yeah, I think this was awesome, and yeah, this is what college basketball is all about, man.
Perfect. Yeah, and I think we kind of mentioned it, but this could potentially be, a weekly thing, or maybe every like a bi-weekly thing when there is kind of, new developments in college basketball. We might just even go on here and shoot the shit for 20 minutes just talking about, the happenings in the previous week. This is, like I said, throughout this entire episode, this is the best time of year. Um, there's a lot to talk about. There's this is the biggest sports league in all of college athletics, and as these conference tournaments happen, man, we're going to see some, heartbreak with guys that, are super talented and should deserve a spot in the field get knocked out, and you're going to see teams steal bids in the high major divisions, and even in these mid major conferences as well. Just going to be a really fun time, and I'm excited to kind of go down this road over the next month or two. But yeah, other than that, guys, go over to Twitter, give Nick a follow at CBB Nick, and I will give it a tweet out on my social media at RobDFB as well. And obviously, it's going to be going up over here on YouTube. But with all that said, y'all, I will see you in a future video. Take it easy.